I got the new Elon Musk book. It's actually, I was going to send you this excerpt because I read about 100 pages of it, but I'm kind of skipping around the book. And there's this one part of when Elon takes over Twitter, and there is the head of policy, Yoel Roth, who, like, I was hating on Yoel Roth bad during that because he looked like the censor police
he's
in the Twitter files.
He's the ex-FBI,
CIA. Yeah. He was the one. Yeah. But when you read that book, it actually like humanizes him. And, you know, Elon comes in and they're like, bring in Yoel. And Elon's like, I want to see Twitter's tools. He's like, who has access to these? Because Elon was super worried about a rogue employee.
Yeah.
Just taking down everything. And he's like, there only needs to be one person that has access to those tools. And he's like, delete everyone else. And Yoel's like, I already did that 2 days ago. And Elon, like, he's kind of like taken back by that. He's like, okay. He's like, I like how this guy's thinking. And then he just like point blank asks Yoel, he's like, can you be trusted? And Yoel said he's kind of like taken back. But then he gets a call. He's at lunch. And it's Elon's attorney. And he's like, hey, Elon said reinstate Babylon B. And Yoel's like, okay, hold on. He's like, you know, they went against policy, our misgendering policies. That's why they were banned. And the attorney came down and talked to him, and they ended up, he's like, there's a lot of nuance to this, because if you open up that floodgate of we're not enforcing our rules, you know, there's all these second, third order effects. And the attorney's like, shit, you're right. Okay, let's talk to Elon. And tells it to Elon. Elon's like, yeah, but it's like a part of, he's like, this was written in the Constitution. It's like a part of presidential pardon. And Yoel, I didn't know if he's being serious. And he's like, yes. He's like, but he's like, this is social media. And he's like, if we let up here, it's like everyone's going to be asking, like, hey, do we actually uphold our policies? And then I'm going to be pushing. He's like, you can change the rule and say that we won't ban people for misgendering things. And you know, Elon like sat there and thought about it, because I didn't know this, but Elon, one of his kids transitioned, and Elon was like, look, he's like, I want to be clear. I don't think that attacking people or misgendering people is cool, but I also don't think that it's sticks and stones and violent and hurting people. And Yoel was like, I actually like really agreed with him on that. And he's like, and actually we started setting in these policies, like I was actually very vocal about, hey, I think we're stripping too much free speech. And so you see like behind the scenes of all this, and like I was like, actually, Yoel doesn't sound like a half bad dude, but like I did like hate him throughout that whole thing.
It's so easy to black and white folks without you know, without nuance and context. It was like when the girlfriend and I were doing the birthday party on Who You Invite, and I'm just like, I have to invite the entire city of Richmond. And she goes, what are you talking about? And I go, I don't invite Lindley, and I can't invite Paul. You know, it's just like you get at the list.
Yeah.
So it's just like everybody's coming.
John, let me get a few seconds.
Sure, Bossel. How was your weekend?
We could have just rolled that into BDE.
I thought we were.
I wouldn't be. I just needed John.
Bossel here fucking us up.
Come on, Bossel.
I was thinking about that. You know how I told you about what's the fantasy football? Matt Berry.
Yeah.
He's like, man, he's like, my newsletter. He's like, no one comes to me for fantasy football picks. They want to know like what's life like with my son. But it's like even just like interesting things like that. Like, hey, we read something. Like we should just like talk about that stuff. Because
so one of the greatest things Matthew Berry ever wrote was an article called "This Time I Said Yes," and you know his wife has 3 boys with the first husband, and one of the boys came to Matthew Berry and said, hey, you know, can we start a fantasy football league? And everybody asks Matthew Berry to do that all the time. And he always says no, because he doesn't have enough time.
Yeah.
But when his stepson came in and he said, this time I said yes. So they were at a soccer game, and he went up to the first husband, and they'd always been respectful to each other, and just said, hey, you know, me and I forget the son's name, John, are putting a team together for a fantasy football league. You and Paul want to put one together. And so they wound up having this draft at their house. And the first husband shows up with the longtime girlfriend. He and his wife are there, and he printed out rules, and half the kids there had played before, half the kids hadn't, and they just had this great time. I mean, somebody drafted, pick Mark Sanchez in the first round. You know? And they did all that, and it supposedly just totally reduced the tensions around everywhere, because all the friends and the parents were like, oh, I can invite them both to a party. It won't be a big deal.
Yeah.
And he said even he and the first husband started sitting next to each other at games. They started texting each other, hey, you missed this soccer game. Here's some video of it and stuff. And the whole point of the article was this time I said yes. Yeah,
that's one shows like if you find common ground on things. It's just like what I was talking about with like Yoel there. It's like, oh, like he actually doesn't sound like the person that you thought he was, and there's just a lot of nuance. But if you can like shape up something, like fantasy football is great for that. You know, there's other
just any kind of commonality, like to your point, right? Like the internet's so weird because it's like people fight about one tiny microcosm of a topic, but then they don't ever talk about all the other things that they may or may not have in common.
You see it in energy all the time, like all the fighting between renewables, oil and gas, and nuclear. But we've seen that here at Digital Wildcatters, and we've done it at things like Fuse, where if you get everyone together in the same room, you actually find out that you have more common ground than what you think.
Well, and this is, I think the founding fathers missed one big item in the Constitution. And you're going to laugh at this, but I truly believe this. Political opponents running in a race should have to eat dinner together once every 2 weeks for 2 hours with their families, no media. And if I ever ran for office, I would say that to my opponent, because it just, when you're sitting there with your families for 2 hours, no media, no grandstanding.
Yeah.
It's
real. It's not.
Yeah, it's real. You're going to find a lot more.
It's not talking points.
Yeah.
So something else I don't understand, and it's too bad Mark and Kirk aren't with us. I think they have a joint prostate exam today, maybe. Is that the new thing? That never gets old, by the way. I love
we
that.
need a skit of all BDE hosts going to get the doctor together to get our prostate.
2 for 1.
Well, next time I do it, I will record it, because it's actually an important thing for men over 50. All right. Here's the deal. Crude's been hanging out above.
Please don't record you getting your prostate exam. I can't let that go before. It took a second. It took a second to record what he said, but all right.
All right. Crude's over 90. I've been hanging out over 90. But if you look at any of the indexes, they're all down 5%, 3%. So the public stocks are not tracking with the run up in crude. What I think is going on, and this is Mark's area, not mine, but the public stocks are just tracking the major stock indexes. The Nasdaq's down 4, the SPE's down -3. I think what's happening is you've had treasury yields on the 30-year go above 4.5%. So this whole notion of a soft landing, what's going to happen is, a lot of doubt being cast there. Stocks are hurting, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what to do anymore with the public stocks. We've been talking about how there's so much run here, and it ain't happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've never personally invested in any public oil and gas equities because I just don't want to. But two, I always just find it so interesting how they don't necessarily just track with commodity prices, right? And so even if you're there and you're really thoughtful about what's happening on a macro level and you're tracking molecules and supply and demand, there's just so much that goes into a public equity stock. What does their hedge book look like? What does their drilling program look like?
What is their ESG stance?
And markets just sometimes don't make sense in the first place either. So,
well, I found they actually tracked more with spot prices, and I never understood that because arguably you've got 40 years worth of production at an E&P company. Why doesn't it track the 3-year strip, the 5-year strip, something like that?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't.
Yeah.
So.
I always, what I really enjoy though is I enjoy watching people go through the mental gymnastics on Twitter and, try to explain why this or that's happening. And I'm like,
within 20 minutes.
Yeah. Is it all right to just accept that, hey, maybe nothing nothing makes sense. But there is some interesting kind of geopolitical backdrop, which I know nothing about. But we brought in. I guess we should have introed John in on the show.
Hey guys.
Didn't have Kirk and Mark here today, so we brought on our substitute Armenian.
What are you
expert.
talking about? We traded up.
No, we traded up. Yeah.
So John,
thanks, Chuck.
lay it on us. What's going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do my best to be concise here, but you gotta have a little bit of history to kind of understand it.
First we had we were talking about this in the office, and Chuck had brought it up, and I'm really just very impressed with Chuck's pronunciation of Azerbaijan. I can't say it, so I'm glad Chuck Campbell were talking about.
I'm glad
it.
That's my bar.
Yeah,
Colin pronounce something. Azerbaijan,
and John chimed in. It's like, hey, that's my people. John's got Armenian heritage. So, anyways, didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
No, you're good.
Take it.
Yeah, so both my grandparents in some way or form are from Armenia, so I'm 50% Armenian. But yeah, so dating back to 189 BC, this area, there's a name that the Azerbaijanis call it, and there's a name that Armenians call it. Being Armenian, I'm going to call it the Armenian name. It's called Artsakh, with a nice on the end of it. But Armenia is the oldest Christian nation in the world, dating back to literally BC. And this area has been in Armenia, or part of Armenia, for over 1,000 years. Of course, the Ottoman Empire came through. World War I happened. The Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire fell during World War I. So there was some conflict back and forth. Then the Soviet Union rose and basically declared this area an autonomous oblast. So kind of just like these loose Caucasus area. Then when the Soviet Union fell in the early 90s, conflicts started popping back up again. Generally speaking, it's been fairly peaceful over the last 30 or so years. But a majority of the population it's like 95+% is Armenian. But in 92, when the Soviet Union fell, they both claimed it as their own. It was then just kind of given to the Azerbaijanis on an international level. But last week, or at the end of 2022, the Azerbaijanis actually set up a blockade on the only route from Artsakh to Armenia, effectively blocking anybody trying to flee. And so there was a lot of tension and worry, of course.
I think there were some shots.
Yes, no, there was
shots.
There was definitely
strikes,
legitimate conflicts. Of course, both sides say that the other was, targeting civilians and children and stuff. I tend to lean towards the Armenian side of that, but the big thing there is that Armenians basically are one of the first documented genocides on history. Even Hitler referred to the Armenian genocide when talking about the Jews. And so any kind of blockade or attempt to kind of block off that region brought up this whole like, hey, we've been through this before, like we're not going to do this again. Finally, last week, I believe, the Azerbaijanis came in and took over the area. This gets even more complicated because Armenia has a treaty agreement with Russia that Russia basically has a standing army in this area. Azerbaijan has a treaty with Turkey. And of course, Turkey and Russia have been going back and forth over a bunch of stuff in Syria. All of this is important to the energy space because there are a bunch of pipelines that run from Baku over on the Caspian on the east side?
Yeah, the east. On
the eastern sea to over into Turkey, which also then goes out into Europe and the EU. But one of those pipelines carries over 1 billion barrels per day, most of it going to Europe and Israel. Another one carries 9 billion cubic meters of gas from Azerbaijan to Turkey. And so, of course, you've got ties to Russia, ties to Turkey, and then also the EU downstream of all of this potentially being impacted if there's any kind of major conflict in this region because these pipelines run right next to it. And so,
Well, and don't forget that Azerbaijan is producing 800,000 barrels a day of oil.
mhm.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's not insignificant.
yeah,
in
that's
a world
material.
of 100 million barrels a day.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then it is compounded by, of course, the whole EU trying to reduce the reliance on Russian crude and all that stuff. But if this gets interrupted or has to shut down, how do they do that when the source
So has
goes
this
away?
conflict been has it been increasing over
Yeah, the last few
last
years,
couple months, couple years?
it's gotten worse. There was I think, a direct offensive in 2020 that kind of went back and forth, and then, like I said, most recently in the end of 2022, they set up this blockade, and then since then, it's kind of been back and forth with this most recent activity being last week. Finally, it sounds like an update to that as of earlier today, as they are finally letting Armenians leave and flee to Armenia, but of course they're not letting them go back and get any of their stuff and all this stuff. So now you're going to have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees coming from their homeland, essentially going back to Armenia with essentially nothing.
And so the key to this, as I understand it, is the Russians are clearly distracted right
Yes.
now. And so this is giving Azerbaijan their window,
Yeah.
if you will.
I mean, listening to John talk, that was like my next question, because he said Russian is supposed to have a military presence there to prevent this, but obviously Russia's
Yeah, they didn't put up much
preoccupied,
of a
so-
fight apparently last week, from what all the records are, and most of the fighting was from actual Armenians in the area, just kind of pushing back. But now I believe there is a ceasefire, and they are letting people flee, just not, being able to go get any of their stuff. A lot of people had been at like Russian military bases, sleeping outside, really crappy, horrible conditions, and people are calling for Red Cross and other aids to start ramping things up if they're gonna actually let people start leaving now. But yeah, it's kind of a similar situation to the Crimea, Russia, Ukraine stuff, where it's this area of a region of dispute between two different countries. But to your point, of course, Russia has other things going on geopolitically that they're kind of more focused on, and so it's an interesting thing.
Well, it's something we have to watch, because it's one of those things that could wind up with much broader implications. And we wind up taking 1 million barrels a day of oil out of circulation because the pipeline blows up. I mean, eventually that gets diverted someplace else by ships and all, but that's not an overnight event.
Yeah.
You start blowing up oil fields. I mean, we've seen that in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. You'll blow up a pipeline, as I like to say, the Nordstrom's pipeline.
Oh, yeah.
We saw that.
The Nordstrom's. Yeah, I want an interesting fact that's completely irrelevant to this, but I'm looking at a map right now. I saw Kuwait on here. Kuwait produces 3 million barrels of oil a day, so roughly 3% of the world's oil production. And you can drive across Kuwait in 2 hours. Like, I didn't realize that until someone came on my podcast that was from Kuwait, and I didn't realize how geographically small Kuwait is. But it's just interesting, like, how energy dense some of these
That whole
areas
region,
are.
right?
Yeah,
You've got Kuwait, Iran, Syria, Turkey,
Yeah.
Azerbaijan, Russia.
Yeah.
Like, it's all.
And then if you actually just start thinking about it, the social unrest and just the amount of war and instability in that region for all of recent human civilization history. I mean, it's just always been like that, right? And so just much different life than what we live over here in the United States.
No, go read
but-
the Old Testament. It's been going on for a
Yep.
while.
Yeah. Well, I
So-
mean, even to John's point, just in, recorded history, this conflict's been going on in this
2,000
region
plus
for
years.
Yeah. So
Well, hat tip to Doug Green for pointing that out this morning, and we'll watch it as it goes. All right, John, you're on the spot for this story. The United Kingdom has pushed back on the internal combustion engine ban. So now they were going to ban them by 2030. Now they're talking 2035. And the Prime Minister, this is kind of cool. Prime Minister Sunak of the United Kingdom said this is an unacceptable cost to hard-pressed British families.
that's That's a stand.
That's the hottest take I've heard in a minute from somebody at that level about a practical approach to energy.
As Mike Umbro would say over on Twitter, this is a boomerang of policy coming back. But I mean, look, when all those 2030 targets started getting set, which was just like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I mean, think about it. It's like, it's only 8-10 years away. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. And so,
I mean, they're only year to date EV sales are only 23% of the market in UK. So
yeah,
I mean, if you're talking to get to 100% in 8 years, that ain't happening.
Well, I mean, there's just so many different variables to it, right? Yeah. One, the pricing of EVs, charging infrastructure.
Just the infrastructure problem alone.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, even if you have the infrastructure, we're seeing this in the US now. Okay, well, whose charger is it? Is it working? Is it available? Like,
well, which
all
is
of those
interesting
things,
because
right?
like you're starting to see the Tesla superchargers start dominate, Elon, I mean, had Elon had big brain moves there, and just understanding how big of a problem charging would be. And, no one outside of Tesla's been able to make a reliable charging network. Just straight up, everyone hates all the charging networks because you go show up to one and they don't work, and they're inoperable. And so anyways, I think that we're at this inflection point, at least in the United States, of charging to where we're starting to see what the path forward is in commercially viable charging. But I mean, that doesn't happen by 2030, right?
Well, it's a corollary to a lot of things, right? Like you look at the tech industry, you look at, the standards that have come out of it, like USB and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and stuff. And that's going to have to happen at some point in the charging industry. Like each company has their charger type and their, ratings and stuff for that. But like, that's way over the average person's head out of the gate.
That's
right?
Ford. I mean, you see this Ford partnering up with Tesla for
and
their
so
charging.
They're either going to end up partnering like that, or they're going to come up with some industry standard or nationwide standard or something like that we,
But I want to say one last point on this, and I'm going to ask the girlfriend to close her ears and not listen to this. But the subtle point here that's happening, and I'll say it this way: if you took London out of the United Kingdom, they are poorer than Mississippi, our poorest state. And I think this is a growing recognition of we are damning those people to a pretty bad life if we're saying you got to drop $100,000 on a Tesla.
Yeah.
And again, where that comes to, and I've said it many times on podcasts, but I'll say it again, is if our solution to climate change is, hey, poor people, y'all can eat cake, that's not going to end well for anyone.
No, so, I mean, that just leads to civil unrest, right? And look, superior technology and economics always win. And I think I've said this many times. I believe that electric vehicles can be superior products in certain circumstances. I think that long haul trucking, I think that's a pipe dream for Elon. I don't think that'll happen. I think that even long haul passenger vehicles, like going on road trips, isn't ideal. But hey, driving within the city from office to home is definitely a use case where EVs are fun to drive. The acceleration on them is quick, and just a great user experience.
My Tesla is an amazing car.
But
what
it's
the
even
greatest part about that Tesla was? It had a program where on the dashboard, every seat in the car would come on. If you push a button, it would make a fart noise in that seat.
Of course, that was your favorite.
That was your favorite. That was so cool.
Yeah. Quick acceleration.
Dad, I didn't do that.
Chuck's just playing with the fart button the whole time.
But you look at it, and I look at it from my personal perspective. I'm better off than most people, and I'm not rich by any means, but better off than most people. And still, I'm like, it's hard to justify. And maybe I'm just cheap. I like my 2015 Toyota Tundra that's paid off, but it's hard to justify going and buying an EV, especially with I'm like, if I want to drive to Midland, well, I'm going to need another ICE vehicle to do that. And just the price of them, it's just cost prohibitive. And, there's reliability issues. And so I think over time, the theoretically the price should come down, but you need time to allow that to happen and technological innovation for that to happen. You can't set these arbitrary time limits like this has to happen by 2030. You're just setting yourself up for failure at that point.
Yeah.
So,
Show me the roadmap and all the studies that y'all did that showed that this was a feasible thing to accomplish by 2030.
I think
right?
it was,
And it's like,
I think it was Goldman Sachs in 97 or 98 that said by the year 2020, 98% of the market would be hybrid cars. And what are hybrid cars? 1% of the market.
well, that's also
today.
bringing up another point too, is that this is something I talk about often, that I feel like we're kind of leapfrogging over hybrids when that should really be the next step, in my opinion, because you get the best of
both, right?
both worlds. The technology's proven, and I would buy a hybrid.
Like, could you
all
imagine
day.
if Ford, instead of the Lightning being all electric, if it was a hybrid?
Well, yeah, I mean,
I would buy that in a minute.
Well, you look at their EcoBoost.
Mhm.
Tundra just came out. Toyota just came out with a hybrid Tundra, and I was actually super interested in. The dealership's been hounding me to buy them as they come in. But there's some issues with that one where I'm not sure if it's a better value prop than their gas engines. And Toyota's problem is like their gas truck is just such a fucking good truck that it's hard to justify going to an EV over it. But I'd be interested to see if there's, in Mike Umbro's words, if there's some boomerang effect to where you see some of these manufacturers start going deeper in on hybrids. And I already kind of get the feeling that that's where Toyota is positioning themselves. They've been very clear that they're not going down the EV trail, but I mean, they were the trendsetter in hybrids. So
I was gonna say the new Prius also looks pretty good. I think that's
the
even
problem with the
right?
Prius. That was always the problem with the Prius in the original time, was that it just looked dorky.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, if you would have just made that a normal car, I think that you would have got even more buy-in. It wouldn't have just been some hippie, greeny car,
They added some nice curves and stuff to it. The most recent one that they came out with, and I think it's going to do well because of that factor alone.
I would drive a hybrid 100%.
The car's purpose is to woo women. That's it. Period. Case closed. So, hey, Colin, you sent out a cool tweet this weekend that I think I saw last night in between my hangover and losing at poker in Vegas, about manufacturing. Recount what you said, because I thought that was good stuff.
Yeah, and it kind of plays into this EV battery discussion. I saw a conversation over on Twitter that was kind of heating up. Our friend Craig Fuller, CEO of FreightWaves, very knowledgeable in supply chain and logistics, was in a conversation with someone that I think the original poster said something along the lines of manufacturing wasn't coming back to North America, and Craig chimed in there and said he disagreed, and I also disagreed. And someone's like, name one thing that's being manufactured in the United States, and I just kind of went off the top of my head. And I'm familiar with a lot of the battery plants and semiconductor plants, but I'll just read some of these off of here because I don't think a lot of people know how much manufacturing and building is being done right now. But Intel spending $20 billion building 2 chip factories in Ohio. Samsung building a $20 billion chip factory in Texas. Since the CHIPS Act in 2022, 60 semiconductor plants have been announced in the United States. I mean, this is a federal initiative to take dependency off of China and other parts of Asia to produce our
It's Taiwan, basically.
Taiwan.
We basically said China's taking Taiwan.
Yeah.
We need to get chips built here.
LG is building a $5 billion battery plant in Arizona, and also spending a ton of money expanding their plant in Michigan, and they have plans for 6 more plants in the United States. Panasonic building a $5 billion battery plant in South Carolina. And then, I've got, there's all these startups. I also mentioned Firehawk, because I just love Firehawk. They're based up in Dallas, but do all their testing out in Midland, and they build and manufacture rocket engines and rocket fuel. And so it's a super exciting time, not just in energy, but in manufacturing. And I think that there is this thesis that a lot of these manufacturers are going to co-locate with energy assets, or at least be built in energy dense areas. And, you already see this. One of my friends, he's a petroleum engineer, moved up to Ohio and took a job for Google, working for their data centers. And, they're up in Ohio because they've got great weather. They've got cheap natural gas and, solar up there as well. And so I think that this is a broad theme that obviously the government has had a hand in with the CHIPS Act and with the IRA. But, to be honest, I'm perfectly fine with tax dollars that are being spent on infrastructure in the United States. If it's spent on healthcare, if it's spent on education, I don't like sending money over to Ukraine or.
Well,
it was misplaced, Colin.
If you ever follow Rando, Oilfield Rando on Twitter, I mean, he's like, we're sending money to Israel to train journalists on,
South America sensitivities. I mean, it's great.
And so, anyways,
I'll even go a step further, because I've historically always been the biggest free trader on the planet. I thought that was good for humanity and all. You go through one pandemic where you can't get an N95 mask, or you can't get
anything.
Ibuprofen.
I mean,
anything.
I'm still waiting on the chip for Sarah's car that we bought last year.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're selling brand new cars without parts because they literally can't get them. And they're like, screw it, we'll just do a recall. And just that's easier somehow than actually making it locally, right?
And I'm not a Trump fan, but at the end of the day, Trump and his protectionism rhetoric generally in the right direction. I mean, we've got to build stuff here. I don't think we're going to be able to put this photo up on BDE, but I'm looking at one right now of all the gigafactories that have been announced or being built. It kind of follows the chili belt, if you will. They talk about kind of New Mexico through Texas all the way up through the Midwest through Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And I still don't believe Skyline chili is actually chili, but they say it is. But I mean, you're having gigafactories built all along there, in Kentucky.
And what does that overlap with? It overlaps with
cheap gas,
and then
stable power
and lower regulated states that are more friendly to business. And so, that's just kind of some of the
right to work states.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, people think about manufacturing from the perspective of, reducing costs and the logistics of getting it, whatever you are manufacturing here. But the other part of that is, guess what? Energy is a big component of manufacturing, and the cheaper your energy costs, the more money
that's literally, you're gonna be able to make. That's literally your input. I took this 3-month program on Harvard Business School online, and one of the case studies was you were looking at manufacturing plants and their marginal cost to operate, and it was all a power input. Then they're looking at that and it's like, hey, what's our electricity costs? And really just understand, like, hey, when you have a semiconductor facility, like it's just like oil and gas. What's your highest cost to operate? It's electricity.
When they go out and they get futures contracts and stuff with their utilities too, just like the oil and gas companies.
And while we're here, just real quick, because I've been talking about it on Chuck Job podcast, we just are in no way, shape, or form capable of generating and transmitting and distributing the power we're going to need in the United States with AI embedded in everything. And the Xbox network and Bitcoin mining and data centers, all that, we're in no way.
Which this is a good thing. This is a good thing. This is technological advancement that will progress society forward. And so it's a good thing. Right now, the current problems that we have, especially in ERCOT, is really a distribution and transmission problem. It's not as much of a power production problem that people like to make it. But as we start bringing on more things, that problem can be multifaceted. It can be both a power production problem and a transmission and distribution problem.
And ERCOT is not a unique mess. It foreshadows stuff.
Yeah.
2 years later, MISO's going to be there, etc.
Yeah.
So,
everyone loves to pick on ERCOT, but it's because you have transparency into what's happening, and it's a more of a free market. And talking about all these data centers, one thing I wanted to just kind of add on to here was I was watching this video from Steve Jobs, and this was like in the 90s. And he's talking to this room full of people, and Steve starts talking about, he's like, we're on the wave of the last technological revolution. He's like, and that revolution was free energy in the form of petrochemicals. He's like, petrochemicals have transformed society and allowed us to do all of these things. He's like, and I think we're on the cusp of the next technological revolution, which is the personal computer. And he's like, again, it's free energy. He's like, this Macintosh consumes less energy than what this entire room costs to light it up. He's like, and what that allows is humans to become exponentially more productive and efficient, to where someday, like if I want to ask a question, it'll give me an answer, and it takes very little energy to do that. And so I thought it was fascinating to hear Steve Jobs talking about, one, how revolutionary oil and gas was to society, and then how it plays into computing in the future and creating even more abundant energy efficiency through making humans more efficient. And so that's something that I've never really thought about a lot of. Bitcoin mining gets a lot of flack. AI data centers get a lot of flack. But when we think about it, it's like, what's actually, you'll look at those as power draws, but what's the net positive for it making society more efficient and freeing up energy and bandwidth for us to,
develop medicines,
Yeah.
etc.
Or even just like with the ERCOT stuff, the on-demand, when they pay the Bitcoin miners to shut down, and
their ancillary program.
it's like that increases the base load. As much as people want to argue that Bitcoin mining is wasteful, it helps make the grid more sustainable and flexible.
Yeah.
And just where battery storage is today, if you've got to have an economic use for power at other times for it to be built, to your point.
Well, that's the thing. People look at it as like, oh, they're just wasting energy. It's like, well, that energy's there whether you're using it or not. So
Well,
like if you really understand the market, it's not, oh, they are just stealing. They're not stealing anything.
No,
like, the energy's there.
They're providing a service that's there to buy electrons, right?
That's actually better for the whole market.
So,
one last thing on this point, because it came out this week too, and I want to do a deep dive on it over the next 2 to 3 weeks, is Microsoft came out and said they're powering their data centers in the future with micronuclear.
Well, they're looking to hire,
and they're hiring.
They're looking to hire nuclear engineers because that's where they want to go. And I mean, if you look at that, it makes sense with Bill Gates and Breakthrough. They're investing heavily into nuclear fusion and these small modular reactors. And so, there's a group of people out there that think that in the future these microgrids will be ran by nuclear, these SMRs, and people are like, oh, you can have one at your house. I don't know if we'll ever get that granular that you have this little small nuke reactor at your house.
Full Iron
but
Man.
but you look at Microsoft. I mean, years ago, I remember them taking their data servers offshore and putting them underwater to cool them in the ocean. They're very forward thinking when it comes to energy efficiency, and these are businesses that are very high margin business that have free cash flow to invest.
Lots of it.
We've talked about this on the show of how much of energy policy these big tech companies are driving right now by mandating that, hey, we want our power to be 100% renewable and clean energy. There's a case to be made that these tech companies end up becoming quasi energy companies in themselves, right?
I mean, they're gonna have to.
I mean, at the end of the day, energy's upstream from everything. It's it's all a point of singularity. It all comes back.
It's going to be fascinating to see the NIMBY effect of that on wherever they decide to put those. Because that's, I mean, it's the same thing with when I got my master's in energy, right? Like you have to go through all these studies, the environmental, the political, the local geographical stuff, and it's most of the time that's where things get hung up, is at the local or regional level, where some group doesn't want that in their backyard or they disagree with it. Well, it's even,
I learned this, I didn't know this, but out in between Andrews, Texas and Hobbs, New Mexico, there's a nuclear facility. And I was talking to a guy that worked there, and I remember a couple of years ago there was this big they were going to bring all this nuclear waste out to West Texas, and there was this big push, and I had people asking me like, hey, you need to post about this and tell them that, you know, we don't want nuclear waste out in West Texas. And I was like, I actually don't think that that's that big of a deal. It's a fucking desert, and nuclear waste isn't that dangerous. Like it's actually a perfect place for it, to be honest.
That's the funnest part about all the nuclear stuff.
Yeah. But even I just thought it was very fascinating to have this NIMBY effect from people in Midland. When I'm like, you literally live in the middle of industry and oil and gas, and
it's not the prettiest place on the planet.
Yeah,
I hate to say.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Look, you can say that. Like, I'm from there. I'm like, it's just kind of a good place for industrial things like that.
It's not Balmorea.
But, you know, speaking of...
let's do this. Yeah.
Speaking of Midland, I want to give a shout out to my good friend, Case Van Hoff over at Diamondback Energy. He wrote this op-ed in the Midland Reporter Telegram, and there's a bond in Midland for $1.4 billion. And this includes building 2 new modern high schools. You know, the high schools in Midland are over 60 years old, and updating the junior highs, building a new elementary. And it's got a ton of support from Diamondback, Pioneer, Chevron, Endeavor, Conoco, Permian Resources, ProPetro. You know, I see Sam C over at ProPetro being really vocal about this. And, you know, the thing is Midland has had an extreme lack of investment in infrastructure in the community over the last several decades,
since the 80s, basically, right?
Yeah, despite a massive rise in prosperity in oil and gas. And, you know, it's pretty sad to see the state has some of the poorest performing schools in the state. And, you know, you look at it from Diamondback's perspective, it's like, how are we supposed to attract the best talent here if the city won't invest in itself and provide good schools for our kids? And, you know, there was a big ordeal around this $20 million park that was being built, and a lot of it was donor money getting shut down, and just this mindset of not investing into the community. And, you know, we just talked about this manufacturing wave that's happening. You know, the future of West Texas isn't just oil and gas. I mean, it is prime spot for manufacturing, for aerospace and
data centers.
I mean, the future of West Texas is super bright, and it needs to stop being treated like an extraction colony and being treated like a energy export hub. And I was telling Chuck earlier, I was like, you know, Midland, Odessa should be like Dubai of America. That's the level that it should be on. And, you know, if you go watch, you know, Friday Night Lights, the reason Friday Night Lights movie was able to look so realistic from, you know, a time frame in the 80s is because shit hasn't changed. Right. And so
I was going to say, if you've never been to Midland, it is just like abruptly shocking at how old all the houses are for the most part. Right. Like, and it took me forever to figure it out. It's like, oh, well, shit, that was when the last bust was, you know? And then you get into the 20, you know, and they're selling for what houses here are selling for, and they need all this work. And it's crazy.
I graduated from Midland Lee in 2008, so it's 15 years ago. And then my dad graduated from that school 30 years ago. Chuck was saying this is the same thing down in Richmond. And it's like the same building. And Julie's like, yeah, well, things have changed. I'm like, it's the same building. Yeah. They took out the swimming pool. They put, yeah. And anyways, you know, it's just an area that actually, I didn't even know this the other day, but I was looking at GDP on localized areas, and Midland, Odessa has the highest GDP per capita in the United States. And the infrastructure and the education system should be a representation of that, right?
Absolutely.
And so, Case brought up a really interesting thing in this piece that he wrote was, he joked because he's 37. He's like, the average age in Midland now is 32. He's like, that puts me in the old guard now. And really, I've never thought about this, but we talk about the Great Crew Change a lot. And Digital Wildcatters only exist because of the Great Crew Change. And I didn't think about this extrapolating out to actually geographical location out in Midland, but that's what's happening, is that the new generation's coming up, and that's what Case's article was, kind of this plea to like, hey, it's time for the young generation to step up and let's change this place and, make it a place that we actually want to live. And, I actually find it pretty cool because I was in this roundtable and discussion with a couple of E&P execs, and some of them, like Case, he's not from Midland.
USC.
Some of these other people, they weren't from Midland, and just hearing like their love for the city and like, we're never moving here. Like this is a perfect place to raise our family. And so people see the potential in Midland, and in West Texas, and all they're asking for is like, can we invest in this and make this a community that's prosperous for our kids and our grandkids. So,
two good points about that Case brings up is, number one, we've got this weird Robin Hood recapture legislation in Texas, and I'm not fully vested on how it works, but basically, in effect, profits of a school district can be taken by the state legislature, and I think last year it was $5 billion that was taken away from local
insane.
Education. So if you can create fixed cost, i.e. interest and payback on bonds, then that's not money that's subject to recapture by the Texas legislature. So there is a financial element to this. The other great point I think Case made is he was quick to say, hey, this isn't a perfect bond.
Right.
A lot of issues there, but net, it's we're better off if we do it. So I still fundamentally have a problem with the public education system that we deliver it the same way we have for the last 200 years, because nobody else does that. I think we need competition, private enterprise. That said, I have a tendency to kind of buy his argument of, hey, net, this is going to be good.
You can't let perfection get in the way of progress, right?
Yeah.
And so anyways, if you're out in Midland and interested in hearing more about this, there's actually a Young Leaders Roundtable on October 2nd, 4 p.m. at Bush Convention Center. Speakers take the stage at 5 p.m. Speakers are Case, President and CFO of Diamondback, Tyson Taylor, SVP of HR and Comms at Pioneer, Sam Sledge, the CEO of ProPetro Services, and then Will Hickey, co-CEO of Permian Resources. So I'll actually probably come in town for this as well. And so you can find information on that online. And
so, Colin, I'm so convinced that Midland's going to become the next Dubai. I'm going to go buy the Bennigan's franchise down in Monahans. That's how I'm going to play this opportunity.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, Huddle House is always the spot in Monahans for me. But
it's ridiculous though. In all honesty, as someone, I was born here. I grew up in Memphis. I came back here, but every single person that you, generally speaking, that you talk to that isn't from Midland, that is potentially going to have to be in Midland, one of the first things they talk about is, well, the schools suck. And it's like, how are you going to attract more people to stay there if you don't invest in the most basic thing, which is education?
Yeah.
Like, it's unbelievable.
Well, I was telling Chuck, it's kind of mind blowing is when I graduated, there were no technical elements of school or education, and you live in the most prolific oil and gas basin in the United States, and one of the most prolific in the world. And there's a lot of kids that don't want to go to college, like myself, and there's no preparation for going out to the field, right, or just learning any trades. And so, Chuck had a great point earlier before we started recording. He was talking about was it Telluride?
Telluride, Colorado.
Yeah, and how they go ahead.
Basically, Telluride, Colorado wanted to have really good schools, and so they everybody wants to live in Telluride, but it's really expensive. So they went out and built, in effect, free housing for the teachers, There's a great summer camp in Telluride where teachers can earn extra money being camp counselors and the like. And they made it such that a teacher can live there, and they know if it's even close, they win because of their geography. It's it's the most beautiful place on the planet. And, you know, if you have really good teachers and a really good principal, you can teach in a tent. I mean, I understand you need facilities, and I get that argument. You don't actually.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, I will say something on that. You know, I agree with you. It's always about people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything, whether it's education, whether building a company, like it's about people. You know, here at Digital Wildcatters, we have a really shitty office. It's not about the office. It's about the people that are in the office, right? And so, but with that said, you know, we live in Cinco Ranch and got some of the best schools in the state. And every time Julie and I go up to our kids' schools, every time we're like, man, this place is just so nice. And like the attention to detail on certain things. And so there's an argument on both sides of facilities.
But what's important in me telling that about Telluride is they have geography. They don't need something to attract. If you're down in Richmond, Texas, you probably want to have the nicest school buildings on the planet to be able to attract teachers and all. So what I meant by that was it's situational.
Yeah, well, those, you know, and the problem just specifically to Midland, Odessa is that, you know, one, salary or teachers are underpaid. I mean, across the board, across all districts. I mean, it's bizarre to me that we don't invest more to get better talent to the people that are teaching our kids.
Really helps when they take away the increase in pay for, you know, master's degrees and doctorates and stuff too.
Yeah.
Katie.
And so, and then, I mean, you know, Midland, Odessa is not a very attractive place to go work if you are not there for the energy industry already, right? And so, but one thing that you brought up while you were telling me about Telluride was like, Midland, Odessa should really focus on like becoming the place where, you know, if you want your kids to learn like technical things around trades or engineering, like that should be like the destination for that, right? Like that's what they should be known for is, you know, pumping out the most engineers out of any location in the United States. And so
I can guarantee you too, you pull enough engineers like myself, and one of the biggest, you know, pushbacks, things we wish we had was more hands-on experience. Instead of sitting in a lab and doing these theoretical things, take me to the thing that we're learning about and show me. Right.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh, guess what? It's all literally in your backyard.
You're 5-minute drive away. Yeah. That's
and then on top of that, what drives real estate prices? Most of it is the school. Like you and I both live in Katy because the school districts are some of the best in the country or state, right? It's like if you had better school districts, guess what? People would build more, people would stay. You wouldn't have this boom bust issue that Midland has always been fighting. Yeah. Because there would be incentive for people to stay there, whether the industry was there or not.
Yeah.
And I don't know a set of parents that wouldn't move to Midland if they had the best schools and the best opportunity for their kids.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's
everybody
what I'm
does that.
It becomes a draw. So anyways, if you're in Midland, definitely go check this out. I think you have to RSVP, or they're asking for RSVPs. I don't know. Maybe you can just show up Bush Convention Center 4 p.m. But with that said, we'll wrap up the show. John, thank you for subbing in. That was perfect, man. I actually I learned a lot today, so appreciate you subbing in. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to share it. Always appreciate the comments that we're getting over on YouTube. Read every single one of them. So thanks for that. We'll catch you guys next week.